Okay, watercolor landscape painting. We just did a video on how to actually use the materials. So now let's talk about the actual work that you're going to do. So, project objective. My job for this project is to apply what I learned about perspective and the use of watercolor paints, watercolor colored pencils to create a landscape painting based on a photo reference. We've talked about foregrounds, middle grounds, and backgrounds before. It's part of the monochromatic sunset painting that we did. Remember, foreground is closest to you, middle ground is in the middle, background is furthest away. The lower on the paper is foreground, the closer to you. Middle is in the middle, background is higher up. As it moves back, you see less and less detail. It becomes less and less bold in color because there's more air between you and it. So when something's up close to you, you see the detail, you see the colors, it's very bold, it's very bright. As it moves away, you lose those details. You lose those bright colors because more and more air get between you and the object. So kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about how you're going to create your work. So by the end of the project, I will have created a realistic landscape painting using watercolors and the watercolors, colored pencils, including all details and color variations. So the photo reference that you've chosen from the board that was up here before, you picked the image that you wanted to do. Now you need to make sure that that whole image gets into your work. The materials we're using, number 2 pencil, the photo reference that you've already chosen, 12 by 18 watercolor paper. Okay, remember, if you remember from our self-portraits, the watercolor paper will have kind of a feel to it, kind of a texture. That's called the tooth of the paper. That's what holds the water the best. And then the watercolor paints and watercolor colored pencils. Vocabulary, landscape is a painting or drawing in which natural land scenery such as mountains, trees, rivers, and lakes is the main focus. Obviously, that's what we're doing. The watercolors, any paint that uses water as a solvent. Remember, the more water you use, the more the white paper shows through, the lighter the values. That's a solvent. It kind of dissipates it. Paintings done with this medium are known as watercolors. Colors are usually applied and spread with brushes, but other tools can be used, like the pencils. Most common techniques are the wet on dry, where the paper is dry and the water and the paint is actually wet. The wet on wet, I showed you guys the water, you use water, you wet the paper, and you wet the paint. So you're painting the wet paint onto the wet paper. Colors can be removed while still wet slightly by blotting. Like, so if you take a paper towel and kind of blot where you just painted, it'll pull some of that paint back up so you don't see it. It won't go back to pure white, keep that in mind, but it will pull up some of that color. Most watercolor painting is done on paper. That's what we're going to be using. Let's see. Colored pencils, they're the drawings. So these are not the regular color pencils. You can't pull out regular color pencils. They have to have that paintbrush. Remember, I talked about this. But they have to have that paintbrush emblem on the side in order for it to be a watercolor colored pencil. So watercolor paint is actually made into the pencil. Other colored pencils will not work the same. Perspective, the creation of depth on a flat surface. So this is flat, but we want it to look like there's a foreground, middle ground, and background. Space, the element that refers to the emptiness. So we're creating this space, the emptiness around the objects that gives us that foreground, middle ground, and background. And then texture, the element of art that refers to how things feel or look like they might feel. So you're doing a lot of trees and leaves and grounds that are like cement. You want to grab those textures and add them in by adding details and color variations. Helpful hints. Watercolor colored pencils. You can use them like regular colored pencils and then add water, and I showed you how to do that, where you actually draw first and then you take the paintbrush and the water and you go over it, or you can actually dip them, the pencils, right into the cup of water and draw with them that way. The easiest way to start is with the background first, and then work your way to the foreground. So maybe doing a wash of color. So if the main color, like this one, the main color was this kind of like light pink, they kind of did a whole wash of light pink and then worked their way on top of it. Keep adding to it so that you have these nice layers of color. Bright white areas, does your image have a bright white area? If it does, these areas alone, you can leave the plain paper show through. Since we don't have white paint necessarily, and yes, there is the white color pencil, but it's not like a paint, it's not going to just white out everything. You can leave the paper show through so that it's pure white and then kind of paint around it. Okay, so step one, photo reference. You're going to pick the landscape photograph that you want to use. You've already done that. You've written down the number, you've turned it in, and you will get your little photo reference back. Practice. I told you guys to kind of experiment with the watercolor color pencils. Make sure you've done that. See what works. See how it reacts with the paper. How do you get the details that you want? Step 3, pencil first. You're going to lightly sketch your landscape onto your paper. You don't want your pencil showing when you're done. No pencil marks at all. So you want to draw so light that the kid sitting next to you can't even see your drawing. That's how light you want to. You just want to kind of map out, where is the tree going to go? Where is the farmhouse going to go? Where is the sunflower going to go? You know, you kind of just want to map it out without actually drawing it all in, because you're going to be covering it up with paint. Step 4, you're going to create. You're going to use the watercolor paints and watercolor pencils to create the landscape, all the details, all the color variations. So if there's yellows and oranges and reds all in one area, yellows, oranges, and reds need to be included in that area. And then step 5, you are going to grade yourself. So in here, and here's some, I know they're black and white examples, but you have examples that you can look at up on the board. For composition, for 9 to 10 points, a strong, thoughtful composition, the painting fills up most, if not all, of the paper. Top to bottom, side to side. We don't need a border on this at all. For 9 to 10 points, exploration and development of ideas. Completed painting shows excellent, clear, and thoughtful decisions were made when choosing the landscape image and the watercolor techniques. So thoughtful decisions were made. How am I going to show those details? How am I going to show those areas of blue? You're making decisions as the artist to really capture the image onto your drawing or your painting. Organization and relationships for 9 to 10 points. Good, clear, and thoughtful use of texture, color, value, space, and unity. If you don't remember what those mean, look up your book pages in your binder and go through them again. Okay, for watercolor paint, control of the material and processes for 9 to 10 points. Completed painting shows excellent, clear, and highly effective use and control and understanding of watercolor paint, its techniques and processes, meaning you got the effect you wanted to get. If it was meant to be a wash, it's a wash. If it was meant to have some details and color variations or value changes, like dark to light value changes, you were able to do that. For the watercolor colored pencils, the control material and processes, completed painting shows excellent, clear, and highly effective use, control, and understanding of the watercolor color pencils. Were you able to show details by using them? Were you able to decide, do I dip it in and draw so that it spreads a little bit, or do I draw first and add the water so that it spreads a lot but still shows a little detail? Those are decisions you got to make. Color variations and details for 9 to 10 points. The entire painting includes all of the color variations and details from the original landscape image. So I want to be able to know which image you chose by just looking at your landscape compared to the images. So here I have a little contact sheet of all the different images. Number 54 is this painting. So this little guy right here is this painting right here. I want to be able to see that when I look at your work, or when Mr. Judge looks at your work, you can see actually what it looks like. And then perspective in space for 9 to 10 points. All shadows and highlights are clearly represented. The landscape painting looks three-dimensional. There is a clear foreground, middle ground, and background in your work. So it doesn't look flat. We want it to look 3D. We want it to look like it goes back in space. That our farmhouse here is not sitting at the very bottom of the page. It's in the middle. We have land before it. We have our farmhouse. We have land after it. Okay? Craftsmanship for 9 to 10 points. Careful time and extreme care was put into the entire landscape painting. So the whole thing, craftsman, you don't have random colors. Oops. You work your whoopses in since you can't erase them. Personal vision and presentation, outstanding for 9 to 10 points. Outstanding demonstration of personal and creative response to creating a landscape painting. Highly accomplished personal evaluation and critical thinking skills are clear in all of the choices and decisions that you were making. How are you using these two materials together in one complete image? Okay? You got to critically think about these things and make them work. And then for 9 to 10 points, on time and complete. Work is completely done. No additions or corrections need to be made. Work was done on time and turned in. And then the reflection is the normal reflection that we always do. So, you pick your image, you practice the materials, get comfortable with them, get your paper, sketch out your drawing, just kind of map out where it's going to go, then you start your painting. Okay, remember only pure white areas, leave the paper show through. Everything else needs to be painted. Lots and lots of details, lots and lots of color, as best as you can. You want to really capture whatever is in that image. You really want to capture. Now, like the sunflower, I had the student, there's like 1,000,000,001 sunflowers in the actual image. Do I have to do all of those? No. Up close, they did a few. And then as they went back, they used the color and went in with the dark to kind of show the multiple. So yeah, you have to make kind of some decisions. Like, do I expect you to do 1,000,000 sunflowers? No. But you can still tell that this whole field is filled with sunflowers by how they chose to do some of the big ones up close and then the smaller ones in the back. We have our road here that gives us a perspective. Close up, further away. We have a foreground, the middle ground, and the background. Foreground, middle ground, background. Here we have the leaves that go over the road and the grass by the trees. Here we have the foreground is actually where these trees up close kind of covered our image. Our bridge is our middle ground because it's actually behind our trees here, and then our trees go in the background. So we have this foreground, a little different than we're used to because it's actually on top versus at the bottom, but you can tell it's close and you can tell the bridge is behind it. Then we have the bridge, then we have those trees. So think about it, plan it out, play around with the materials to make sure you're comfortable with it, decide what colors work best together, which one needs to be put down first, which one can go on top of it to really get the effect that you want to get. Help each other out, ask each other questions, what would you do, how would you do this, that kind of thing. Okay, I hope you guys do great. I know that you will. Seek each other out for help if you need to. Use the materials to the best of your ability. I know you guys will do great on this. You've already used watercolor paints once. You're just using them again in a little different way. We've used colored pencils before. You're just now using them in a different way. So just kind of test it out and see what happens. And you guys will do great. Good luck. Do a good job.